So let's move right into the next session. I see we have a lineup over here. It's the broken rung, barriers holding women back at work. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator today. Oh, okay. Well, we have a couple more minutes. So I tap danced as a child, but I will let you all know that our moderator is retired Army Colonel Candice Frost, Director of the Integrated DoD account for Nightwing. In this capability, Candice manages the DoD portfolio of technical capabilities and high-touch services supporting sensitive activities and special programs. Bear with me as I... Give me grace. Don't bear with me. Just give me grace. Candice's distinguished military career included operational tours of duty in the Balkans and multiple deployments to Afghanistan and the U.S. Army. During her military service, Candice was instrumental in the integration of women in combat arms and standing up U.S. Cyber Command. Beyond Candice's professional achievements, she is a mentor, she is an advocate, and a truly wonderful person. She is also the mother of a son and daughter. That is not in my remarks, but I know this to be a fact. And so please welcome Candice to the stage. So glad the timing worked out.
I know. Well, thank you all for being here today. And that was a very nice introduction. But what really matters are the panelists here. And so I have got anywhere from academia, industry, government. I mean, we've covered the entire landscape. So we're going to go through some questions together as a panel. Please prepare your questions as well. We'll ask that. But I'm going to start down. If you could say who you are, why you're here, and what organization you're from.
Okay, my name is Joellen Adkins, and I'm with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I am the Deputy Director of the Human Development Directorate, where we develop humans, otherwise known as Human Resources. Okay, I'm here today because I think it's important to communicate and to have that experience, a shared experience with everybody here, to talk about some of the issues that we're all facing as people within the intelligence community and how we can better ourselves. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Cece.
Hi, I'm Durall. I'm the Executive Director at the National Counterterrorism Center. Got over 30 years in the intelligence community and a couple of years in private sector. I'm here today to share anything that might be useful for all of you who are on your journey. Any observations, ways in which I continue to be resilient in the community, and so.
Awesome. Kate.
I'm Kate Hewitt. I'm the Deputy Director of Nuclear Forensics at the Office of Nuclear Matters at the Department of Defense. I'm partly here as well representing Girl Security, where I am a board member of this nonprofit organization that tries to increase gender equality across national security, and also here because these kinds of events sort of fill my cup up, if you will.
Good morning. I'm Cortney Weinbaum. I'm with RAND. I've been at RAND 10 years, but in this community for 20. And I'm here for a pretty specific reason. I was one of those first wave of hires after 9/11. And when I started in my office, I was the only woman under the age of 50. So to say young woman is, an exaggeration. My male colleagues would like to inform me that they had grandchildren older than me. And so I have made it a bit of a career goal to help everyone who comes after me, because it's hard being the token. It's hard being the token, and I think that having friends and mentors really helps.
Awesome. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Leung. I work for General Dynamics Information Technology. I have an initial 26-year career as a Naval Intelligence Officer, and then I've been with GDIT for the last 5 years. The reason I'm here is I, like many of us, have experienced kind of a few decades of growth in our community, and I want to continue the conversation and make sure men and women have the opportunities to be able to grow in this community and afford themselves the ability to excel.
Awesome. Well, as you can see, you are in for a delightful panel. And we are going to start off with, not a softball. We're going to start off with a fastball. So, Kate, are you ready?
Yeah.
I think she is. So we've kind of prepared and talked about, hey, what are the things we want to get to the audience so that they understand where we are looking at some of the issues that are facing the workforce right now. And Kate, if you can kind of talk through some of the obstacles when we're really looking at that first step up to leadership, where there are disparities between promotion and then the practice within many organizations, we really start to see women evaluated and advanced based on past achievements, but so many men based on potential. And what are some of the things that you would say that can mitigate that bias in evaluation?
Okay, great. So I had been told when I started in this field that women need to always over-prepare, so I have notes, okay? So I think many of us have heard this quote, right, that the first step in solving a problem is recognizing that there is one. And when we all met last week and chatted about how, our experiences in the national security and intelligence spaces, it varied pretty wildly, I think, in terms of the experience that we have had in terms of the leadership and women in representation that we have in leadership at our organizations. And so I wanted to take a little bit of a step back and just say that, of course, that progress has been made, continues to be made. I think we have all seen that and continue to see that, right? But I'm just going to hit you with some statistics here, so bear with me, right? 24% of the cybersecurity workforce is women. 17.8% of CIA agents are women. 14.4% of active duty military are women. 28% of STEM and security professionals are women. LC Wins, the Leadership Council for Women in National Security, has a really cool gender tracker that you can look at, and they put out a report every year. So last year's report looked across all national security fields, or 9 national security fields, and said 45.6% of 500 leadership positions under the Biden administration happen to be women, which seems pretty good when you look at it. But when you start to delve into the details a little bit more, for example, at State Department, 51% of those leadership positions are held by women, but only 1/3 of the top 3 leadership positions actually are female. So it seems like it's equitable, but then when you start to dive into at the embassies, the top 3 sort of senior leaders, if you will, at each embassy, only 1/3 of them happen to be females. 33% of DoD leadership positions are women and are outnumbered at every level, with the exception of the Office of the Secretary of Defense and with the DepSecDef and the Chief of Staff. And that across 7 to 9 levels of seniority across all national security fields, women remain underrepresented. So I think, we are making progress for sure, but there is still a huge underrepresentation in leadership when you start to really break down what the numbers look like. And so what are some of the steps that you can do, or the measures that we can take in bias and mitigation? And I'll be very, very real. I'm in my first job leading a team right now. And so I am new to this, and I think I will pull a lot from my other panelists here. But I think there are a few things that we can do. And the first is to really do the data, right? You need to write everything down. You need to track everything. You need to do the work internally to really look at your teams across the board and see what are people making salary-wise, how many are the numbers there, what is the satisfaction levels. It's not just, do you have women in positions of leadership, but are they happy there? Are they paid equitably? And a bit of the onus of that is going to be on us, I think, as well, because you have to let people into that data. But I think as we think about the rest of this panel today, and as you think about mitigating bias, I think you have to be really blunt with the fact that this system, the national security and the intelligence system, was not built by women with women in mind. So the rules that we have to operate by were not made for us, and so I don't feel like we should be held to them, to be totally frank with you. So when you're looking at positions to bring people up for promotion or to hire new individuals, you should encourage candidates that that are strong females to apply for those jobs. You should share those opportunities across female networks. You should straighten the crowns of everybody that that are women around you, and you should tell them that they should apply for those things, even if they think that they are not qualified to do them. You don't have to play by the rules in this particular thing, and if you cannot mitigate the bias, then you need to rise above it.
Awesome. I love that. So we're going to straighten some crowns. And as we're polishing them, I know Cece and Stephanie, this next question's for you. You're polishing someone else's crown, but you're also understanding that some implicit biases exist. And where are some of those things that you've observed or experienced in hiring, promoting, performance evaluations, and how have you seen them impact career advance?
Okay. I'll go ahead. So, as I mentioned, I've been in the community over 30 years, and what I've seen is some significant strides in terms of investments, and investments in time and investments in money in some programs that are really starting to show an effect. And when I think about recruitment, when I think about hiring, the investment that's been made in a program, many of you are probably already familiar with the IC Centers for Academic Excellence. Because one of the issues that we saw in the intelligence community is we were going to very similar places to go for recruitment, to elite institutions and such in a certain geographic location. We weren't getting out to the entire United States. And so the IC Centers for Academic Excellence is an opportunity for us to engage with faculty. They're developing curriculum, and then afterwards that makes those candidates, those students, even the faculty more competitive for our programs. The other thing that I just want to mention when I think about hiring and recruitment is some of those barriers that you may see is with regards to ensuring that the way in which we look at the applications. And I can say that we are doing a much better job from our hiring managers to really understand what are the skills and the knowledge areas that we need for the community. And that's continuously changing. So when we think about STEM skills, definitely something that we need, but at the same time, we also need those power skills. And how can you discern that in the hiring process? And so we're doing a much better job in terms of looking at that. There are some programs also that we've launched which is focused on once people come on board, because we've noticed that people leave us maybe after within the 1 to 5 years. And so I can say that Stephanie LaRue, who'll be speaking to you this afternoon, has been as the head of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility organization across the entire intelligence community, has spearheaded some programs that have really starting to have some effect. And one in particular is RISE, which is focused on those early careerists, people who have just joined us, who are struggling to navigate within the intelligence community and their respective agencies. And so the focus of some of that program is how do you develop your leadership style? How do you bring your values? How do you navigate the system? How do you effectively network and such? When I think about promotion and some of the struggles that we've seen there, something that Katie mentioned that I'm going to talk a lot about throughout my discussion here today is mentoring and sponsorship, and how important it is for especially folks at my level and across the management levels to really pay attention to all the talent that's in our organizations. And how do you do that? It's really encouraging people, as Katie said, lean in, apply for some of these jobs. I'm thinking about what Linnea said. It might not jump out off the page, off a vacancy announcement, that that's something you should apply for, but listen to your mentors. Everybody should have a board of directors, a group of folks that they really trust, who know them well, and listen to them and see yourself in some of these positions. Because one of the things that we hear a lot about, whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector, is just because there's a list of mandatory duties or mandatory experiences or knowledge, skills, or abilities that may be listed on the vacancy doesn't mean just because you haven't done all of these things that you're not competitive for them. Stephanie.
Yeah, so I want to build on that a little bit. Last year when we had this event, one of the speakers talked about, in most cases, if there is a rec out there for people to apply to, women will not apply to a job if they even do not qualify for one area, even one area. And men will always apply. It doesn't matter. And so I have seen this, throughout my entire career, both in the Navy and in industry, that you really have to feel confident enough that you have to let them work it out during your interview. You need to apply for the jobs that are of interest to you, and you need to keep applying for them. I think one of the most important things where I'm currently at is they recognized about 5 years ago some of these issues and started building some programs to be able to not just hire people that look like you. So a lot of hiring managers tend to, it's kind of an unconscious bias, right? They tend to hire people that look like them. And I sat through a hiring board where someone said, don't you think she's a little too old for this job? And I was like, she's the most qualified for the job. So I've started even across the board, when I put recs out, I try to take out those biases. I mean, even simple things like, I want someone that has a bachelor's degree, but as you guys know, you may have gotten I got a bachelor's degree in Spanish literature. I'm doing nothing with that, right? And so to say that I don't have a bachelor's degree in mathematics, STEM, business is kind of unfair because that's not where I'm at. So I try to take away, our organization, and I really think even the military tries to take out some of those unconscious biases now, and I think it's really important. Mentorship is really important. I think you have to mentor men and women, right? I think you have to start the conversation. So I'm going to give you 2 examples that happened to me. So one was implicit that was directed to me, and then one I put on myself. So the first one was I was in the military, and I was applying for a job to be the attaché in Israel. And I was called in before I was doing my interview, and they're like, we don't think Jewish women should go to Israel. Like, what? Gold in my ear? Women in the military as soon as they graduate high school? And I had to fight for the position because they really didn't want to send a Jewish woman as an attaché to Israel. I was the first that they finally sent. It ended up being a plus for me. I mean, I ended up being really good at it. But Suzanne, and I know we're supposed to do this at the end, but Suzanne was talking about your word. Unafraid is really important. You have to be unafraid of knowing who you are and being your authentic self so that you can go after those positions. And so here's an implicit thing that happened to me. I got done with my first deployment and came back to Norfolk, and I was supposed to come up here in about 8 months. When you first come back, you are kind of the ready-duty deployers. So if something were to happen in Haiti or something were to happen where they had to deploy you pretty quickly, you had to be ready to go. So we came back, and about 4 months later, and we wanted to have another child. And I was like, I can't try to have another child because I can't be pregnant and maybe have to deploy again. My male counterparts did not have to worry about that. 4 months later, many people were pregnant with their wives. And then when I was getting ready to come up here, we talked about it. I said, I don't want to be pregnant when I first come up to my new job because I put this implicit bias that I would be looked at differently on myself. And it wasn't until I came up here that I stopped doing that. So it took me about 10 years to do like what Leung was saying, to really grow into who I was and be comfortable in who I was and know that I could do a job. It didn't matter if I was pregnant or not. So I think we have really started focusing on those programs and those opportunities across the board to be able to encourage everyone to apply for positions.
That's a great segue that you've seen change happen. And I think both Joellen and Cortney, if you can take this next one on to what are strategies that you see organizations do to really mitigate both the conscious and unconscious, and even if it's on ourselves, biases that are seen in either recruitment, evaluation, and then if you could also touch on the money side. So that transparency in pay. How do we face that one as well?
Who first? I guess I'll go first.
Go for it.
I want to follow up with what she just said and link it into this because we don't talk enough about pregnancy and family planning at events like this. And so when it goes to biases in the workplace, I will tell you, I delayed starting to have my first child 2 to 3 years later than when my husband and I were ready. And then because of my career, once we started, we had fertility problems. So now I'm like not getting I'm not in the place in my career I want to be, and I can't have the baby. And I promised myself I would never do that again. And part of the challenge I faced then was not knowing how would a workplace handle a pregnancy. So we talk about transparency in workplaces. When I talk to people in HR and people in workplaces who are responsible for workplace policies, the person in the interview should never have to ask about the maternity policy. That should be offered information. The person in the interview should never have to ask about LGBT rights and can my partner get health care. That should be offered information. You know, if you're requiring your candidates to out themselves somehow, just to find out the benefits your company already offers, you're already putting that person in a defensive stance where they're trying to decide, do I reveal myself and my situation or do I not? And so when it comes to salary transparency or hiring requirements or who's the actual decision maker for this position, because it might not be the person you're interviewing with, you know, I'm always a proponent for complete transparency in the interview process. It helps the candidate and the company. I mean, it helps the company to have a wider selection of candidates to choose from. There are people like me who do not apply to a job if there's not a salary range. I don't care how nice the job sounds. If the ad did not have a salary range, I am not wasting my time in setting in an application because I am assuming that you're going to try and jigger the salary based on what you think you can get out of the person at the end, not what this position's worth to you. So I've never applied to a job without a salary range, and I'm telling all the employers here that. You're missing out on a pool of candidates by lacking in transparency. You know, if you have a woman who might be 20s and single but wants a family one day, and she doesn't know if you have a maternity plan, she might take the job at the place that has been touting the maternity benefits during the entire recruitment process, even though she's single and not ready for children yet. So I'm a huge proponent in how transparency is a great equalizer for all types of people, not just for women.
That's awesome. John.
Okay, so really good comments, and by the way, hello. It's nice to be here today, so appreciate the opportunity. So in the federal government, obviously we know that there are a lot of rules that we have to follow and federal laws. So that's actually one of the benefits of the federal government is that there's a requirement that you have to be transparent with some of the pay requirements that you have. So when you go on USA Jobs or whatever site that you go to that is applicable to a particular government organization, that is a requirement. You have to specify exactly what the salary range is. So when you talk about conscious and unconscious bias, what are those ways to kind of mitigate that? It's the first part of the question. So at NGA, and I know this is the case with pretty much every federal agency, it's a requirement that you go through that training. All panel members, when it comes to hiring somebody and or promoting somebody, it's a mandatory requirement. You have to take unconscious bias training. And there's other training that you have to take as well. And what it's supposed to do and what it should be doing and what it does do, I'm hoping, is that it does provide that insight into how a person feels and behaves and how they may act and react towards a person's an interviewee's comments, answers to questions, what they look like, etc. So what we try and do is we try and make sure that a lot of those barriers are identified up front. We have, based in our Human Development Directorate at NGA, we have run across instances through some of our components where they have raised maybe an issue of a particular panel member for whatever reason, and we do address that immediately. So if there is a question about a panel member based on a comment that they made or something that they said or something that maybe they believe, we will intervene clearly and make sure that that person gets that required training, or if the panel thinks that that individual may have some sort of a conflict of interest with that person that they're trying to hire and or bring on board, then we will replace that person with somebody else. So we try and put a number of measures in place to combat some of that conscious and unconscious bias. So that's something that I think is important to say. The other thing is it's mandatory that you have diversity on the panels. So at NGA, and like I said, a number of other government organizations, it is a requirement that we have a person of color, that we have a male, that we have a female, we have a person over 40 on those panels to make sure, again, that that bias, if there is a bias, that particular bias can be mitigated with the other panel members on board. So we like to look at trying to find any way we possibly can to combat that. The other thing is that we use standardized salary setting process where we use mathematical calculations based on education, years of experience, et cetera. The other thing that we do is we do market research for pay. So we look at what is, and I'll take HR, and we'll look at somebody who is in human resources in the private sector. There may or may not be parity between the private sector and the government. That is true. But what generally we will do is we will take that statistical data and we will make sure that individuals coming on board have the most competitive salary as we can have with the private sector. And I think you'll also find out that within the government, there are many times when you may say, well, you make a lot more money in the private sector. Not necessarily the case. It really depends on the role, it depends on the job, and everything else that's combined into it. So when a person does come on board to NGA, we take into consideration all of that relevant experience that an individual may have in the private sector or at another government agency. So again, we try to ensure as much fairness as we possibly can within the process. Is it a perfect process? Absolutely not. Nothing is. Just to be honest, there's no place that is perfect. You're never going to find that perfection. But what you are going to find is we have so many rules in place, whether there are policies, law, whatever it is, prescription from the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, prescription from the Director of National Intelligence. We have to take all of that into consideration. So there's a tremendous amount of oversight, whether it's congressional, whether it's through OMB, whether it's through our overseers, to ensure as much fairness and equity in the process.
All right, and I bet people are running to NGA now. They're lining up. I see them. Well, thank you so much, Cortney and Joel. And I'd like to pivot a little bit to talk about one of the very hard to put your finger on, least understood things that a lot of women experience in the workplace, which are microaggressions. That is a fancy word, but you feel it on the hair on the back of your neck stands up. When you're in a meeting and someone talks over you, or you bring forward an idea, and then 2 speakers later, a man brings it up, and they're like, great job, Bob, that's amazing. You're like, thank you. I said that before. But just that kind of, or even the joking of disrespect or inferiority, right? You're the young one. We've spoken about that. Or, oh, you're the grandma. And then those small things, the dashes of salt that really you can feel in the wound. Kate, can you kind of talk about what advice do you have for women that experience that? And then on the flip side, especially for our awesome men in the audience today, how can they kind of step forward to address and support that advancement, or to kind of understand and either negate what they've ever done or stop from doing, or to help others and recognize it and call out their own peers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think as women, when you come into this field, national security more broadly, you're trying to figure out when to take a seat at the table. And then you're trying to figure out when you can say something at the table. And then you're trying to figure out when you can lead the meeting at the table. And so once you get into this first rung and you become a leader, if you will. I've been in the nuke world now for 8 years, and every meeting that I have been in, with very few exceptions, I am sometimes the only female there. And navigating that perspective from being, everybody else that gets their hand shaked first, and then nobody directly looks at you in the eyes when you're having the conversation, and then you wondering whether it's because you're young or because you're female, or is this me? Is it them? You are constantly asking yourselves those questions. Is it because I wore the wrong thing? Is it because I took the wrong tone? Is it because I punctuated my email improperly? Like, as women, I think you have to do the job, and then you have to do this second job where you're asking yourself all of these questions all of the time, and it is truly exhausting. So if you're feeling those things at any point right now, I guarantee you we're all feeling them too. I think the microaggressions are just sort of the second job that you have to unfortunately recognize it is there. It is a heavy burden to bear as a female when you work in this space. But when I came in, I've been in this job now for 7 months, and I will say I lead a team that is entirely, it's all men. And for the most part, most of them are older than me. So that has its own, just day-to-day navigational issues. When I had my very first brief about the portfolio, my boss happens to be a male. He'd already heard the brief, but everybody on the team just seemed to be directed all of their comments towards him. And I was like, I am your deputy director. I am the person that you are supposed to be sharing all of this information with. It's me. Hi. And so then you're like, I don't want to be too pointed and too aggressive about how I talk to my team about the fact that I am their boss now, and they take their orders from me. So you're navigating all of these things sort of day in and day out. And I realized that when you come into management, there is no rule book. There is absolutely no rule book for how you're supposed to do this. And in a field that is dominated by men, there is especially no rule book for how you do it as a female. So I think the easiest way, and I don't say that lightly, is to find your people first and foremost. You need to find a group of women that are coming along with you as well, that you can gut check some of these things with. Am I overreacting here? And generally you're not. So it's a bit of a pep talk that you need to get from your tribe of females. But then I think once you've built up, okay, I'm not crazy, this is a real thing that is happening right now, how do you tackle dealing with it one step at a time? And I think the best way to do that is to start to articulate and find who the people are in your leadership chain who truly are advocates for you and can help you work through some of these issues. So it's not just your tribe at the lower level, but it's a tribe at a higher level as well. So if you find one advocate in your organization who gets what it is that you're going through and can provide you some input on this, but then at a certain point, microaggressions it's not a part of the job that you should have to deal with. So if you have somebody on your team that is fundamentally being disrespectful to you, right, you have every authority and every right to deal with that and call it out for exactly what it is. I find that to be extraordinarily difficult to do. So I've started to figure out that if I write these things down, either I find it to be cathartic, so it's helpful for me to articulate it in writing, but then to communicate it to my leadership to say, fundamentally, this is an issue and it needs to be dealt with. And I need to call in some reinforcements because I don't feel comfortable doing it myself, or I would like somebody else in the room when I'm starting to have these conversations. And then I think finding those people don't necessarily need to be women. So some of your biggest advocates, I think, in this space absolutely can and should be men, both from a gut check perspective as well to say, is this appropriate behavior here? And I think if you have the right men around you, they will say, absolutely not. One of them happens to be here. I invited him today. And I was sending him some emails from an event that I went to where a male that I was briefing was just pushing back on me. Every 5 minutes, it was just this constant deluge of throwing microaggressions at me, if you will. And then I got a really nice email from that gentleman after the panel that then mansplained everything to me, which was excellent. and I got this thing, which he had addressed to K, which is not my name, and I am a GS-15 who was addressing this gentleman, and that man said to me, he was like, that is inappropriate behavior. Like, you should not be addressed in that manner. You should demand respect from that. So I wrote an email to that person's superior, and I said, I will not speak at this event again. OSD Nuke Matters will not participate in these kinds of events if this behavior is continued to be tolerated by the people that you are inviting. And that person apologized immediately, said it would be taken care of. They absolutely want us to come back. So you need to have those people in your corner. I think it's really important, and they can be men, and sometimes they're your best advocates. And the last thing that I will say is, as you build this tribe of women that are behind you, like they can help you push this rock up this mountain, if you will. It's easier to do if you have other women that are pushing the rock up. But if you already have a man at the top of the mountain and he's putting down a rope or a pulley for you, just take it. I mean, like, it really, truly, the system is not built for you. And as I said at the beginning, like, you don't have to play by these rules. You should be utilizing these people who are in your corner that are willing to go to bat for you, and you should not think twice about doing so.
So as we are already motivated from our keynote that started this morning, Cece, I want to pivot to you to also talk to whether some of the barriers or understanding some of the things that women of color face in the workplace that sometimes differ and are not seen by white counterparts, and how can organizations address or acknowledge and face these challenges?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a difficult one in the sense that here we are in 2024, as Linnea said, 248 years for this country, and some of the issues that we're dealing with in the workplace are still the same. I'm sorry to say that we do still see racism, we see stereotypes, we see gender bias, we see a lack of allies, we see stereotyping. All of that still occurs. It's still very real. What I'm encouraged to say, though, is that we are not alone in terms of taking action against it. So to Katie's point, in terms of, leading out and seeing if there are others who are observing this behavior as you're experiencing it, and reaching out and trying to lend a hand and help say that this is not the way we behave in this organization, in this unit, in this agency. There's more and more of that occurring. Probably not enough. But I go back to something Linnea said as well, and we just said once again, is perfect, right? It is not perfect, so we have to address head on the behaviors that we're experiencing in the workplace. I have some stories in my past, of course, in terms of exactly what you're talking about, those microaggressions that I've experienced. And I could say in the mentoring that I do, when I hear others who've experienced something very similar, for instance, making the comment in a meeting, when you were describing that, Candice, it took me right back to a conference room in McLean, Virginia, where I was surrounded by a bunch of men, and they were struggling because there was a little bit of chaos because we had new leadership coming in. And we were trying to figure out how are we going to best orient the way forward for the organization, and how we were going to tackle, engaging and introducing this new leader to some of the things that we were doing. And as I was trying to voice up, it was like, yeah, okay. They would listen. Then they'd move on, and as you said, somebody else would say the same thing, a male, and it was like taken and such. So, but what did I do with that? What did I, in terms of continuing to be resilient in the organization? Took that as a lessons learned, helped others, and even in that moment found the courage to take aside that gentleman and have that conversation and explain, I did say something as well, so perhaps we could do this together, because if you're thinking about efficiency, that took more space for you to have to repeat it instead of if you'd heard me say it the first time, right? So, so just trying to, tackle a little bit from that angle. But as I said, one of the things that, especially in the center, so our Counterterrorism Center is part of the larger ODNI organization. Some examples of some things that I've seen definitely different, certainly in the last 5 years, is the fact that we have women leaders across the organization. At the center, when I joined and became the executive director, the deputy director was a woman, the director was a woman, and then when I looked at leading the actual ODNI, you had 3 women as well. So I can say that I am walking into conference rooms where things are changing pretty significantly. Now, that's women, just women. Now, when it comes down to women, minority women, that is taking much longer, I'm sad to say. However, I would say that when I look across at people who are competing for promotion, there's a lot more folks, much more diversity than there was in the past. I could share with you some statistics, but I just recommend that you just take a look at our ODNI website. We have, in the spirit of transparency, so we can give data for people to action upon, we have that information all posted. And one of the things that we've done in the last 2 years in our agency and also in our center is provide more of that data and make it available to the workforce so they can see where some of the obstacles are, and managers can be, with intention, taking action in that regard. Within the center, we also have, we conduct listening sessions. So as I mentioned, some of the things that are going on in the organization, we want to hear about it so we can address it with more intention. In addition to unconscious bias training, we also have bystander intervention training. We have empathy training. So we are trying to roll out more resources, more tools, because we understand that managers are not perfect, humans are not perfect, but as we make some of these resources more available, and also we allow the space for these difficult conversations to occur, it's going to help the organization grow.
And those are great advice. And intentionally, we have people walking around, not just for fun, holding cards. If you would like to ask a question, we're going to combine all the questions together so that you don't have to stand up to a mic or get a mic shoved in your face. They'll gather those up, and we'll ask them right after we hit the next question, which is to Joellen, Cortney, and Kate. We've talked about some of the things that we've shown as examples, but where are those supportive areas in the workplace where women support each other, and how can you most effectively do this?
You want to go? Do you want to go? Do you want me?
It's all you.
I'm going to tie this to the previous answer as well, because you had earlier asked, what can men do? And so I'm going to answer this question on what can women in the workplace do and what can the men do, because we do have some amazing men who have shown up and who are here today, so I want to address them. I find that in any situation, when a microaggression is said out loud, it becomes a lot more interesting to the conversation. So if you're the man in the room, or you're the more senior woman in the situation in the room, well, we don't call people sweetie in the workplace here. You might not realize that, but that's not appropriate here. Or, I thought her necklace was totally appropriate and she did a great job briefing. I have a colleague who routinely will say in meetings that I'm in, after I say something and we're 3 comments later, well, I'd like to go back to what Cortney said. And he amplifies what I say, using my name to credit me for the one who's having said it. He's not taking the credit, and puts the spotlight back on that issue. So there are a lot of things that the men in the room, or even whoever is the more senior woman compared to the woman who is facing, or what minority is facing that microaggression. So there's plenty of things people can do. But to your current question, the advice that I have always taken for myself and given everyone, no matter your demographic group, race, gender, have a board of advisors. And I explain what that means to people. Everyone in a professional setting should have a board of advisors. And these are people whose opinion you value and you respect, and who you trust enough that you could be vulnerable with them. So they're people who you can build a relationship with over coffee. They get to know you over an amount of time. They understand where you are in your career, where you want to go in your career, and you can ask advice to them. And the difference between having a mentor and having a board of advisors is a mentor is one-off. A board of advisors is a diverse group of people. Some of them are women, some of them are men, some are minorities. Some are inside your organization, some are outside your organization. Some are more senior than you, or in the kinds of jobs you want to be in. Some of them might work HR, and they can just help you with HR-related questions. But these are people who already know what you're dealing with. Maybe they're about 6 months up to date on your career at any given point, so you can call them in a pinch. And the thing I always tell people is there's like this great proverb that the worst time to make a friend is when you need a friend. Well, the worst time to find a mentor is when you need a mentor. You need to already have that mentor. And so I find that if I have a board of advisors, I have a mentor for that situation who's already ready to answer the phone and talk to me. And your board is going to change over time. People are going to come and go from it, and that's great. And they don't have to all know each other. They're just there for you. But always having a board that you're refreshing throughout your career is a great way of having those allies that you can call up in a pinch. They know you, they care about you, they're invested in you, and they're going to give you some great advice.
Awesome.
Sure, I'll go quickly. First of all, everything that she just said. I think mentorship, I think board of advisors, I think a triangle of supporters, if you will, of people at your level and then going up to the top. However you look at your mentorship, it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary in this field. You don't move up truly without it, and so everything that you just said. I think the other thing that is sometimes tough for women is that it's not a zero-sum game here, right? Like there is room truly for all of us at the top. And at a certain point, as you start to dwindle down, you're going to be competing for jobs with other women that you know and respect very much. And that's the way it should be, right? Like, you should be bringing all of these women along with you, so that at some point you can envision, running the world next to them. And I mean that in just the starkest way possible, because I think sometimes we see other women as competitors to us. And that's not how we should approach it. It should be that there is room for all of us at the top, and you have to bring those people along with you. And to something you said earlier, there is a bias of, I think a lot of men are like, well, I know this other guy, and that's the person who got the job. And men do it all the time, and like, women should also be doing it too. And so when you hear somebody say something brilliant, tell people about it. And when you see somebody doing something excellent, like, call them out for it. Share their stuff on social media if you can. Send them job postings all the time. Like, there is room for everybody, and we are better off when you are competing against women that you respect the hell out of.
All right, Joellen.
Okie doke. All right, so from the question is about support networks and mentoring programs for women. So within the government, there are special emphasis programs, and there's one called the Federal Women's Program Council, which is a fantastic way to get together with other women within that particular organization. So what I would say is that's one way. Events like this are fantastic. This is another obvious way that you can participate and get to know other women and kind of form those relationships. Within the IC, there is something called the IC Affinity Network, Women in Intelligence, the WIN organization. That's another fantastic organization and a great opportunity for individuals to get involved with that. And that's outside of your particular agency. That's at the OD&I level. I would absolutely recommend something like that. John F. Kennedy said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." So going back to some of the previous comments, that's exactly true. And that means, how do you get those individuals within an organization, the women that you know, and lift them up and encourage others to do so? And a lot of it is by entering those particular organizations and doing it. The other thing that I think is really important is going out, identifying somebody that you've heard at a meeting and you really find them fascinating for whatever reason, depending on what they said, doesn't matter what it is. Try to get to know that individual. At NGA, we started a program not that long ago where we actually do something like that, where if you have somebody that you know and they've said something that really sparks your interest or resonates with you, we're trying to get more individuals to reach out to others outside of their particular organization. So if you're in the Directorate of Analysis, but you hear somebody in another organization say something that is particularly interesting or something that's relevant to you, take that opportunity to get to know them. That really does grow your network, and it grows your network outside of just the area that you're working in. So something like that I think is important.
Awesome.
Yes.
I have to go into lightning round. We're at the 10-minute mark. This has flown by already. So I'm going to hit lightning round, merging a lot of the questions that you've asked. Some are specific, some are kind of vague. So one answer per, and the first one goes to Stephanie, because Stephanie, you had expressed interest about mentorship, and what's the difference maybe between mentorship and sponsorship? What are programs that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think it's really important about the culture of the organization you're going to be in. And I think based on transparency of benefits, you should also be able to look at the culture of the company or the organization that you're thinking about being hired into. And one thing I love about GDIT is our culture is all about everybody. Our president likes to say we're a culture with a soul. We're an organization with a soul. And it resonates. It's not something she just says. And so I think, what Janelle was talking about, the organizations within government for women, many of the industry partners have what we call employee resource groups. And many of them have ones focused on women, focused on pride, focused on Black Americans, focused on Asian Americans. And I think it's important that you find those areas that are important to you. And when you talk about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, When you're mentoring someone, you want to give them the broadest understanding that you have of the IC, of the organization. And although you are a one-off because you're kind of a SME in that area, it's important to make sure that they have the ability to reach out among that. And when you talk about sponsorship, you're sponsoring them into your culture. And you should have a culture of inclusivity. And if you don't, and I don't care if you're a man, if you're a woman, I mean, it's important across the board for people to understand that they can be authentic and feel comfortable of being who they are, no matter what organization that they're being sponsored into. And if you're out there looking for a job in national security and you can't get a good feel of what their culture is and whether or not it fits you and who you are, then you should look in other places, because there's many organizations that will meet your cultural needs and requirements. I think everybody should be a mentor. I think and you should reach out to people. Sometimes I think when I was younger, I love what you were saying, like the time to find a mentor isn't when you need a mentor, right? When I was young, someone told me very early on, like, find a mentor. And in the Navy, it was really hard to find people who were like me. A lot of my mentors were men who appreciated the fact that they had to provide a safe area for us to build our careers. Not always the case, but many times it was. And the other thing is women really need to open that communication with other women. Don't be afraid that they may be your competitor later on, because if we can't talk to each other, how do we expect others to talk to us, right? And so being able to make sure that you are guiding people in this community and giving them the best opportunities that fit who they are and their real self is so important. And then joining these different organizations to make sure that they can rise themselves up and be around other people that can help them rise up is just really important. Opportunities like this, I can't spout enough about how important these are. So.
Stephanie, I think you answered about 5 different note cards with that
I'm
answer alone.
sorry.
Well done. So there are two last questions. Number 1, kind of lightning round. There's a muddy middle, right, where we can bring women in. It's awesome. We recruit them. We get them here. And then it's like, how do you keep them? That retention, or bringing them back to join our community again. What is your advice for that?
Fine.
All the way down. Ready? Advice.
Advice. Find your mentor early. Engage in all the opportunities that are available to you in your organization, and be the leader that you want to be.
So I'm not going to give advice to the women. I'm going to give advice to the employers. Because if you're losing people at like a middle donut area, it's your problem. It's a you problem. It's not a them problem. They're opting out. They're voting with their feet, and they're choosing that they don't want to be here for a reason. So if you're an employer who's having trouble filling certain jobs or filling certain categories or finding the diversity you want, look within and don't blame the candidate pool.
I think you have to be willing to speak up. I think as women, it only gets better if you truly are willing to share and be open about your experiences. Bring other people along with you, but don't be afraid to move forward and draw fire. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure I hit is that I'm reading this book right now called Dear Madam President, and it's an open letter to the women who will come into leadership power at some point. And I keep it in my bag because I'm dealing with some stuff at work right now, and I feel like I need to open it on occasion.
Right.
And one of them is that nothing draws more fire than a woman moving forward. And I think you just have to recognize that if you are going to succeed in this space, it is going to be difficult for you, and you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and you have to be willing to take those risks and speak up. I will be remiss if I didn't acknowledge girl security as well. So if you are looking to do mentorship or be a mentor or get a mentee or find ways to sort of help your organizations push forward gender equality, I think Girl Security is an excellent organization. They have all kinds of resources available to you no matter where you are in your career.
So I would jump in and say, in order to be resilient, just keep in mind that the possibilities in front of you are endless, that a limiting factor could be really just yourself in terms of how you look in front of you at the opportunities that are in front of you. And so back to the comments that we've said throughout this discussion about mentoring and really listening to those board of advisors, highly recommend that. And then in terms of books that I'm reading or I've read in the last year, there are 3 that I really want to help and offer up to you that I think have just recently hit the presses. Is one, Dropping the Mask by Daphne Jefferson. She is a former executive in the Department of Transportation and a very male-dominated field. And the way in which she has written that book, which draws on some key leadership traits, I highly encourage all of you to take a look at that book. There's one called Colorful Leadership by Gloria Chan, which is really talking about how, as women, she coined a term, the feminine alchemist of our time, in terms of how we're trying to reinvent and really challenge the status quo in all our organizations and how we interact. And then finally, Knowing Your Value by Mika Brzezinski. So when we talk about going into organizations and fighting for things that should be really something that should be available to everyone, her book and her story of how she got back to Morning Joe is phenomenal. And I read that book right after I had missed, I was an acting officer, acting leader in an organization, had applied for the job, even though everybody had said I was doing a fantastic job, and I didn't get that job. Yet I read her book, it empowered me to go seek a different job, and from that job I got promoted to executive. So she put me on this train, and it was really empowering.
And now, as we are on this train, we get one last boop, boop. Okay, we have one word that you are going to have people think about you. Sorry, we are running out of time. When they think about you when they meet you, and what would that word be? We'll do lightning round down.
Firecracker.
Ooh, firecracker, I love it.
Possibilities.
Possibilities.
Dogged.
Dogged. Thoughtful. Thoughtful.
Unafraid.
Unafraid. And I will conclude this panel of amazing women with driven. Be driven in what you do, be driven in the people you surround yourself, and be driven in the conversations that you are very fortunate to have today. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll pass it over to our esteemed leader.
Thank you, Candice. I wanted to also thank our panelists and also for sharing your word. I know most of you all are trying to come up with yours right now. I also want to thank my colleague, Peggy O'Connor, who pointed out to me that I need to recognize the men in the room, right, who are brave enough to be here with us. And notice the temperature in the room. None of us are freezing. I don't have my jacket on, and it's because we customized the thermostat for the women in the room. So I'm sorry for all the men who are sweating. I wish somebody had invited me to be on this panel, but no one did. Just a quick story I want to share, because I have the mic. Several months ago, I was playing Vanna White at an INSA event, and one of our partner organizations, a very senior, retired male from the community, referred to me twice as Susan. My name is Suzanne. It's fine. I've been called much worse. But then he called me kiddo 3 times, right? And so I didn't say anything about Susan, and I didn't say anything about kiddo, but he did correct me on how I introduced our moderator, that I mispronounced the man's name. And I got home, and I'm like, you know what? I should have tactfully just pushed back. Maybe less about the Susan, very similar, but kiddo does not rhyme with Suzanne. Although my husband pointed out to me how old I am, and maybe nobody's going to call me kiddo for much longer, so I have to embrace it. But anyway, we're going to take a 15-minute networking break, compliments of LMI, reconvene here about 11-ish for our Ignite rounds. And again, a shout out to some of the men in the room. Some of my best bosses have been men, so.